Hey guys, welcome back to the show. You've probably noticed by now, but maybe you haven't, that we've rebranded and changed the name of the podcast. So we've moved from biohacking superhuman performance to longevity with Natalie Nidham. And we did this for a bunch of reasons. And the main one being that, when I really thought about it, what we're really talking about here is longevity. We're talking about all of the different ways to achieve longevity, health span, vitality, all those things. But having come off a name with far too many consonants, syllables, vowels, all the letters of the alphabet, just about it seems, I felt it was time for something simple and something to the point and something that was really going to get its arms around all of the many things that we cover. And that is longevity. At the end of the day, that's what we're about. So welcome to Longevity with Natalie Nidham. Nothing much is going to change other than the artwork and the name. We're still going to be bringing you amazing guests and covering all these fabulous topics. So thank you for being here. As always, if you're feeling inspired, please do leave us a review because those are the ways that we rise up the ranks. I know that we have lots of new listeners these days, so welcome to the show. We're so happy to have you here. And if you want to learn more about me and all of the different things that I do, head on over to natnidham.com, sign up for my newsletter, and poke around. There's lots of cool stuff there. All right. How badly do you want to optimize fat loss, optimize your hormone health, or your bone strength? Look. And we all know that muscle is your secret weapon when it comes to longevity, right? So today's episode is all about this. I'm talking with Eric Fete, who is a DO, who's a chiropractor and who studied functional medicine. And we talk about the intricate relationship between muscle and bone health, how strength training, proper nutrition, supplements can help to maintain and improve both. And we explore the importance of muscle as a powerful energy factory. We talk about men and we talk about women. So Eric is one of these physicians. He doesn't just deal with one. He really deals with human beings who want to be healthier and stronger and the best of themselves. So we talk about hormones. We talk about different protocols. We talk about GLP-1s. Like we cover a lot of ground and he's got a great perspective on all of this stuff. And seeing as we're just easing ourselves into summer, there's no time like the present to talk about body composition, whether you're a man or a woman. So Eric is the founder of PrimeX, a preventative health, age management, and peak performance company that provides nutrition products, educational materials, physician-grade supplements, hormone therapy, as well as personalized health plans for maximum health, vitality, performance, and wellness. Dr. Eric's motto is learning from the past, living for today, transforming the future. I'm going to let you read about the rest of his biography in the show notes. It's a good one. Now, to check him out, you can go to his website, which is drericprimex.com or primexweightloss.com. On Instagram, he's Dr. Eric Fete. That's Fete. And on YouTube, he's even got a YouTube channel, which is dr.eric-primex, the fitness PH 6601. Okay, that's a crazy URL. You're going to have to check out the show notes for that one. And now let's jump into the episode. Hey, folks, just a quick reminder that all of the information presented in this podcast is for information purposes only. No medical advice, no diagnosing, no treatments suggested here. Before you try anything that you hear about or learn about here, make sure that you check with your medical provider. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Eric Fete. It is such a pleasure to reconnect with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. Good to see you again.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So we were just talking, I think we first met, it's 2024. I'm going to say the first time we met was 2019, in September, maybe at the first SSRP conference.
I think it was. It's been several years. Yes, yeah. I remember. And I think it was pre-mess stuff. Yeah.
Mess. Yeah, pre-mess. When the world was not what the world is today.
before the pandemic. Yeah.
Yeah. Before all that stuff. So it's been a while and we've kind of been existing in alternate spheres kind of thing. And anyway, I think did you reach out to me or did Joel connect us this time?
I don't even remember now. I think Joel connected a while ago. Then I don't know. I must have reached out again just to follow up. So yeah.
For sure. So, I mean, so time has passed. You've built this whole incredible practice, and now you're working mostly online with your patients.
Correct.
But we're gonna visit a few interesting little worlds today. We're gonna talk about muscle medicine, which is a phrase that you've coined, which I love. And then we're going to slide into some myths around hormones for men and women, and then we're going to roll into everybody's favorite topic, being peptides. So let's start with muscle medicine. Well, let's start a little bit about your practice and what's your sweet spot? What do you really love? What are you loving to do these days? What's really floating your boat?
Well, there's a lot of things that float my boat, but I'm going to talk about a few. So for me, it's really about really getting back to our roots, right, of our kind of our ancestral primal health, right? I'm big on movement and getting outside. I'm always, kind of railing against all the, the powers that be and all the artificial crap around us that's trying to keep us down and sick. It's sick care medicine, our crap in our food and the toxins in our grass and our water and the EMF in our phones. And we're trapped inside all day. We're stressed. We're sitting around. It's like, get the hell outside, lift some heavy shit, get some sun, get your feet, go out in the woods, get back to Mother Nature, connect with other people. Let's make this world a better place. Let's try to make it as natural and safe and healthy as possible. So that's my big kind of fire in my belly, I guess.
Yeah,
from the pure medical side, I'm more about health and performance optimization. I rail against this stuff. Similar, like if you listen to like Dr. Jack Wolfson talks about it and things like, because he was on my podcast and we're very similar because I was in that world as was he. I was in the traditional medical world, what we like to kind of joke around as quote unquote sick care medicine, right? So I was an ER doctor and I did that for many years. So I saw people at their worst. I saw all kinds of crazy shit, and it was very rewarding, but it was very challenging. But I also saw a lot of people that were very unhealthy with a lot of bad conditions and that could have been prevented with proper lifestyle and just prevention. So that's what kind of motivated me to get into the preventive side. So I started learning, and I've always been involved in health, fitness and nutrition, athletics and sports and stuff. So that was a kind of a natural fit for me. And then I got into the world of hormone optimization, that kind of gelled. And as I've gotten older, obviously I start picking up more and more people kind of wanting to slow down that aging process. They're like, oh my gosh, what happened? I'm getting a little pooch down here. I'm losing my guns and, I'm getting tired and like, we can fix that. So let's fix your health. Let's fix your body, let's build you back up. So for me, I'm really on the performance side. So that kind of was my avatar. So that's why I just made up the term muscle medicine, because I think the muscle is so important and it gets forgotten about. There's not really a lot of docs talking about it out there. And my marketing guy's like, dude, you're the muscle doc, talk about it, because nobody is. So, because I think everybody thinks of, oh, muscle is just for show or bodybuilders or, it's just for lifting stuff. And no, it's really for your health. Because as we get older, we get what's called sarcopenic obesity. We lose muscle and we get fat, and that's the opposite of where we want to go. And a lot of the image of the old, as we get older, we're in your mind, you think of this slumped over, skinny, belly fat person who can't do anything, and that's true to an extent if you let it. But it doesn't have to be that. We can still be upright, strong, have some muscles, no gut, and be out there doing stuff. That's my goal. When I'm 100, I want to be skiing at 100. That's my goal. I love to ski. I love to be outside. I'm like, I'm not going to be this frail old man, and I don't want you to be that way either. I want us all to be active and strong. So in order to do that, you have to maintain that muscle mass, because as you get older, it's harder and harder to maintain. So you have to work harder to maintain or even build that muscle mass. But the flip side of that, what people don't realize, is that muscle is one of the largest endocrine organs in the body. And it has a lot of health benefits above and beyond just making you look good in a bathing suit, right? So it helps your brain, it helps your bones, helps your gut, it helps your pancreas and your liver and your gallbladder. It can actually reduce any incidence of getting diabetes by improving your insulin sensitivity. It can improve your liver's ability to detox and keep your bones strong, so you don't get a fracture, you don't get weak bones. Anyway, it does so many things through all the hormonal functions, and also by the secretion of myokines, which are these little cellular messengers. A lot of people know what cytokines are, right? And there's little cellular messengers that are made by pretty much every cell in our body, but muscles make them too, and they're called myokines. And they're one of the ways that they exert these influence on our body. So anyway, so that was my thing of muscle medicine, to kind of bring some awareness to the importance of muscle, not just for looks, but for health. And because my goal is I want my clients and my family, everybody that I know, to be live strong, live prime, and live their best life and be able to. And my mantra is kind of live to give. I want everybody to feel good so they can make other people feel good and pass it forward. So that's kind of my passion, and that's what kind of drives me.
Wow. Okay. That was it. There you go, guys. We're done.
We're done. I get excited about it. I just talk. Just tell me to shut up.
No, it's good. You know what I mean? This is the thing, right? Like when you hit your sweet spot, when you hit your one thing, when you hit the thing that you are the most passionate about, it's just you kind of can't stop, right?
Right.
It's such and it's one of those things where you just want people to understand. And I think that it's so interesting to refocus on muscle because everybody's focused on fat.
Right.
And what's interesting about that, it's like, do you remember when you learned how to drive?
Mm-hmm.
If you had a decent driving instructor, what would they tell you? Don't stare at the thing you don't want to hit. Don't stare at the wall because that's where you're going.
That's where you're going.
If you look at where you want to go, that's where the car will go. And it's a little bit like, you know, everybody's so busy talking about, I want to lose the fat. I don't want to be fat. I'm too fat. If we can shift the attention to, let's build muscle.
Right.
Let's take care of this organ. Let's focus here. The fat's going to get displaced automatically by kind of caring and nurturing and re-engaging this organ that is kind of like the forgotten organ a little bit.
Yeah, no, you're right. I love that analogy about the car. You're absolutely right. There's there's also like a psychological aspect of it too. Nobody likes to lose. You don't want to lose a game or lose a bet.
Yeah.
You're gonna lose weight. I mean, everybody says lose weight, but it's like there's that negative connotation. Like, no, let's get fit, let's get strong, let's get mobile, let's get muscular. You know, let's
build.
Let's get something, right? And like, oh, I like that
muscle,
better.
Gain muscle, like
gain muscle.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the relationship. You mentioned a little bit earlier, you mentioned about muscle and bone. And I don't think people really make that connection necessarily, that by building muscle, we're going to improve our bone mass because, you know, and this becomes, obviously it's a little bit, it's a lot more of an issue for women than it is for men. And yet men can also get osteopenia later in life, which nobody really talks about. Right.
No.
So let's talk a little bit maybe about muscle and bone health. Like how are they related? What's the interplay there? And is it through myokines or
Yep. Yeah, no, that's a great, and you're right. Men can get it as well, and it is kind of forgotten. But women, of course, are very well aware. And some of my women that come to me, that's one of their top fears is like, oh my gosh, I don't want to get thin bones. My mom had osteoporosis. I don't want to get it, and my doctor wants me to take Fosamax or one of these other medicines, and I don't really want to. I'm like, you're right, you don't want to, and here's why.
Yeah, you.
So
mom refused Fosamax, and her doctor was horrified.
Right.
But we sent her to OsteoStrong, and she's now got amazing bones. So
there you go. So the one that, of course, probably most people think of course, with, you know, strength training, building up your muscles will help the bones, but you got to lift heavy stuff. That's why you can't be, you know, the girls that they're worried about muscle. You can't do the light little barbells, right? You got to lift some heavy shit, as I like to say. You know, heavy movements, deadlifts, squats, presses, chin-ups, or whatever, even if they're assisted, whatever you got to start with, and you work your way up to it. But just that muscle tension action itself, of course, number one, it's the compressive factor on the bones, which is going to help build it up when you're lifting heavy things. But as you mentioned, the muscles also secrete these myokines, which can act directly on the muscle, osteogenin and IL-6 and all these other different myokines that have all these different names, but they directly act on the bone to build it up and make it stronger. So it's kind of like a hormonal effect, right? If your bodies make hormones, everybody knows that hormones are like little messengers. They get secreted by an organ, they travel and they attach to a cell and they have an effect. Well, the muscle does that with the myokines on the bone. All these different myokines can exert a stimulative effect and prevent what we call bone resorption, or preventing that bone from breaking down and weakening, and it's actually going to build it and make it stronger. And then there's also what they call the mechanotransduction, all the local effects, and nobody really knows exactly how that works, but by putting that tension and working the metabolic functions, the mitochondrial function in the muscle when you're doing that movement, also acts on the bone. So it's kind of a triple whammy effect. So it's going to help you at least maintain, if not build up, some bone mass. And those are the three key factors that people forget about. And just by doing a proper strategy with proper nutrition, some supplementation, and strength training, you can mitigate a lot of that bone, like hormone optimization, which takes it to a whole nother level. But those are the big ones right there. And if you do that, not just from the structural perspective, but by strength training, body weight training, yoga, different things, you're enhancing that mind-body connection, you're improving your balance, your coordination. Because a lot of people get, you hear about women and men, and when they fall and they get a wrist fracture or a hip fracture, Why are they falling? Well, because their balance is off. Their coordination is off. They don't have those skills just to do the basic movement. So if you're doing martial arts, you're just lifting, you're lifting weights, you're doing yoga, something, Tai Chi, standing on one leg once a day, all these different things you could do you're going to just prevent it. Prevention is key, right? So that's going to improve that. So if you don't, if you're able to catch yourself and recover, a lot of these women, they might, number one, they lose their balance because they don't have good balance. Number two, if they do, they can't catch themselves. They're not strong enough to catch themselves, and then they fall. So if you're working your muscles, even if number one, your balance is going to be improved. Number two, if you do stumble, you're going to catch yourself because your strength is there, and then you're not going to fall. So a lot of people forget about that. Same thing with like vitamin D. Everybody knows vitamin D, but vitamin D is actually a hormone. And one of the ways that it improves things, it actually works in the brain to improve your balance, your coordination, things like this. So again, prevention is key. So prevention, maintenance, and then strengthening, and then of course the myokine effect. So it's kind of a quadruple whammy, I guess, now that I think about it. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I love it. Well, and the vitamin D, one thing that I'm a broken record about is K2 with vitamin D.
Always.
Because that K2 is the shuttle bus that gets the calcium where it needs to go to build the bone. But also there was the other interesting thing I think about lifting heavy weight, and we should probably define what lifting heavy weight is, because if somebody hasn't lifted a weight beyond a tin can for 20 years, they might just say, yeah, that's really nice, but I'll just break, right? So but we can define that. But I think the other piece of lifting heavy weights is that hormonal aspect, right? Yep. Is the increasing testosterone, increasing growth hormone, like driving up those factors in systemically that help, that cascade essentially that builds the stronger bones and the muscles and the whole 9 yards.
Absolutely. You're going to get that anabolic effect from those anabolic hormones. Now, it's a fleeting effect, but if you're doing that multiple times, every little bit helps, right? And it all adds up.
Yeah. And so what are your thoughts on vibration plates for,
I think there's,
I'm curious about, because that's been like it's been a little thing I've been kind of circling around for a while. So yeah.
I'm like you. It's one of those things that's pretty cool, and I've seen some good data on it, and a lot of my colleagues have used it and so I think there's some legs there. I personally haven't tried. I mean, I've been on it before, but I've never like consistently done it myself. I don't have one or anything like that, but I've seen some good stuff on it, at least on paper, and some results and reports and clinical anecdotal reports as well. So I think there's something to it, especially if you're starting with someone who's maybe older, or they're fearful, or they really need to work on that. It's a good starting point. It's a good jump start, and it's a good another just an add-on to your current training. And the other thing would be like more like a rehab. If someone's coming back from an injury, it's a good place to get them started. To kind of balance those out. It's going to help strengthen those soft tissues, the fascia, the tendons, the ligaments, and all those things, and as well as some benefits to the muscle and bone. So I think there's a lot of places you could use it.
Yeah, it's funny. This morning, I got one recently in the last little while, and I've been kind of playing with it. I will exercise on it. Like I'll do my, my heavy kettlebell deadlifts on the vibration plate while it's vibrating in three different planes and doing all the things. But I decided this morning that what I would do is I would do a 10-minute vibration plate session before I did my Carol bike, which is, it's like it's HIIT training. So it's like a 2-minute warm up, 20-second sprint. And interestingly enough, I got my best power score ever.
Oh yeah.
After the vibration plate, which was really, it was actually a interesting. We'll see if it's reproducible or if it was just a fluke, but definitely my first sprint was higher than my second sprint last time I did it.
Yeah. I mean,
I lifted yesterday, so it doesn't make sense to me, right? Because when I lift heavy, and I expected I was just going to tank. But
well, it kind of, in a way, it makes sense, because it's almost like you're, I don't want to say pre-fatigue, but you're shocking those, you're prepping them. It's kind of like doing some, really fast push-ups, before you do a bench press. You're kind of warming up the machine, and it's really stimulating. It's like, oh, I got to do some shit, so.
Yeah. Wake up. Wakey.
Let's go.
Okay. And so let's talk a little bit also. I think one of the things that I hear, and we'll talk maybe a bit more about women because I'm a woman, but we're going to talk about the boys too. I think there's the two pieces of the puzzle that as people hit their mid-30s, they start to get busier with work. They might be starting a family. And now we don't have time to go to the gym as often. And the guys start to develop what some people will call the dad bod, women start to, you mentioned it earlier, like that little pooch. And as they're moving into, perimenopause, which is that it could be up to 10 years before menopause actually hits, start to develop the menopause belly and things like that. How are you using exercise in those areas? Like when people just don't have as much time anymore, like what's your philosophy on how much time people should really need to spend on this muscle project, if you will, right? It's like, everybody's personal muscle project and and the things that people worry about, like women worry about getting too bulky, which I find hilarious because
still to this day, I know
it's just not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. Right.
I mean, and if it does, guess what? You're one of the lucky ones.
Right. Exactly. Well, and I'm going to, I say this a lot and I know you do too, but like, it depends, right? It varies, it depends on your situation.
Been listening to me.
But, everybody asks me that too. I'm like, well, it depends on your situation, because because that's the thing is like so many people like are on these cookie cutter approaches, and I try to really custom design everything for everybody because everybody is a little bit different. So you're right. I mean, in terms of time management, the biggest thing is people still have in their heads like, oh, I got to go to the gym for an hour, 5 days a week. I got to drive there. I mean, I just don't have time. And some people just don't have time. But, what I really try to do is kind of start with where they are. What do they like to do? What do they not like to do? If they absolutely freaking despise lifting a weight, well, let's try something else. Because if I could tell you, but you're not going to do it. Maybe you do a banded workout or maybe kettlebells or power yoga or something. Anything is better than nothing. Body weight exercise. But just start with where they're at, and I try to with most people, it's super simple. If they've never done it or they don't know where to start, again, when we talk about strength training, I say, you can get a good workout in 20 minutes. Even if you just do it 2 days a week, that's something, right? Just start because consistency is king and inertia is great too. Once you get started, it's going to be easier to add on. But if I tell them to do this, really complicated 5 days a week, hit one day, Tabata the next, and 5 sets of 5 the next, and then by the way, you got to do bands and you got to mobility. They're gonna freak. They're not gonna do it. Yeah. So heavy do like what you could do 3 sets of 10 to 12 reps. A basic, a push, a pull, a vertical push, a vertical pull, a horizontal push, horizontal, a hinge, and a squat movement. You're done. It could be super simple, and then go walk. Walk for 20 minutes, and then repeat another walk. And I tell everybody, walk every damn day. I'm a big fan of walking and movement. And those people that are busy. See, look, everybody's got time throughout the day. Just, if you're at your desk all day, put a timer. Everybody's got their damn phone in front of them every hour or every half hour. Just get up and, maybe squat up and down a few times, walk around, do some kind of movement. And that counts. It's like that with the NEATs, the non-exercise activity, thermogenesis, that all adds up over time. If you just move a little bit throughout the day, people that are at home at night, I'm like, I always ask, how much TV or Netflix do you watch at night? And it's almost always some kind of number, right? Even if it's just 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, like, okay, every commercial or, every 15 minutes, get up, do 10 push-ups, 20 squats, 20 sit-ups, something, and make up something and do that.
If you do that every day, guess what? Oh my God.
It's easy because now they know I got them because I know when they tell me they're watching TV, I'm like, see, you have time. You just choose not to. So we're going to bust that, so I think if you combine a habit, like a bad habit with a good one, like when you're brushing your teeth, stand on one leg, when you're watching Netflix, every 5 minutes, do a push-up or whatever, something. If you link that in their brain, I think that mind-body connection is very big. So if you start linking those habits, they're not going to forget. And then once they get into that habit, it's going to be easier. So for me, strength train at least 3 days a week and walk every day. That's usually where I start. Keep it simple. And if you want to do extra cardio on top of that, fantastic. Me personally, I think, hitting the weights, like we were talking about heavy weights, something you can only lift maybe 8 to 10 times or something. That's the basics. Some people, I'm a big fan of like kettlebells. A lot of people love them. A lot of people don't like them. I love them. I like to mix those in, but sometimes, especially if they're a beginner, it might be a little too tricky for them. Yeah. But again, maybe they've got an injury or they've got something, and I'll give them the work. They could do band workouts. They could do power yoga and they could do Pilates. There's a lot of other options that they can do. So, and again, the other thing is a lot of people, if they're overly stressed, we have to consider that too, because if they're like, right now is a crazy time. Like I'm an accountant, it's tax season, I'm balls to the wall with work, I'm sleeping sick. Okay, I'm not going to give you a crazy workout. I might only have you walk every day for the next month. And then once things slow down, we'll back off. Because a lot of people get overtrained, they're overstressed, and they're like, oh, I got to do my leg day today. And well, I didn't sleep good last night and I'm tired. I'm cranky. Well, that's not the day. You got to listen. I mean, a lot of my videos, I'm always talking about listening to your body, and it takes time and practice. But if you're tired, you're cranky, that's not the day. Do a back off day or take the day off, do something different. So you have to learn to listen to your body, and that just comes with time. So I think
I have to say that I used to teach fitness, and when I was a fitness instructor, I was working full time in a office job. And I would sometimes be going to teach a class and I'd be like, I'd had the worst day and I was super stressed and I had to drive and I was always late. It was just, I'd go screaming into the studio and sometimes pushing through.
It was your stress relief. Yeah.
Oh my God. You come out the other side and you're like, oh, what was that? I was mad about. What was that thing I was like all stressed about? Like There is that fine line, I think, between sometimes being able to push through and sometimes knowing when to back down, and absolutely. And I do, like, I find that it's, and I think part of it is also helping people to understand that they do have to prioritize sleep. That sitting in front of the TV till 1 o'clock in the morning, like, and I mean, with actually my mom, this is a never ending battle.
Yeah.
Because she's like, well, I can't go to bed early. And I'm like, well, you can't go to bed early because you go to bed so late.
Right.
And oh no, I can't exercise early in the morning. And I'm like, well, you can't exercise early in the morning because you go to bed too late. If you went to bed earlier, you could exercise in the morning. And if you dragged your bum out of bed early a couple of days and not do a crazy workout, but go for a walk or do something like that,
right,
you might find that shockingly you're tired earlier.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
You can start to change that routine.
You can change it. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm big on, anybody's listening to my videos. It's like I'm a big superhero guy. So it's like, think of Superman with the big red S. I'm like the 2 S's, sleep and stress. I always start with those, because if you're not sleeping and you're stressed, ain't nothing going to work. I could have the magic pill. It's not going to work. Right. So we got to double down on that. So yeah, I think you're right. And I'm that way too. If I'm like stressed and like hitting the bag or doing something, I will feel better, but I'm not maybe going to if I'm really tired, I'm not going to do a crazy heavy workout. But, and some people, I've had a lot of people, even trainers who I've worked with, who would know, and they're just doing stuff and they're just doing too much, and you have to back them down a little bit and kind of have a recovery week or a few days. And they're like, well, then they start losing the weight because their stress hormones come down. They start peeing off that extra water, or maybe they do what's called, I like to do like alactate training. I think that's a great, easy thing to do when you do, especially if you're doing like kettlebells, you do like a basic movement, like a swing or some push-ups or something for, 10 reps, hard and fast, we'll call like a ballistic movement. Then you rest, and that only takes 10, 15 seconds. You rest till the next minute and then you repeat. And you only do that like 10 times. It doesn't wear you out, but it's a good workout. It's great cardio.
It's intense. Yeah, no, that's right. Well, and that is an interesting thing you bring up. Doing cardio by doing kettlebells is very different than, you don't, I mean, most people know kettlebells from the CrossFit world, and that's where I got introduced to kettlebells. And I remember at the time, doing some crazy WOD with kettlebell swings and snatches and whatnot, quite apart from having bruises on my arms and ripping my hands to shreds.
Right.
It blew me away how cardiovascularly challenging those workouts are.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
You don't need to run around the block to work out your cardiovascular system.
No. That's
you're killing two birds with one stone here. Like, you're building muscle and you're working out your cardiovascular system.
Yeah, that's the only cardio I really do is with kettlebells, other than walking, or sometimes I'll walk some hills, but I don't like to run, and but kettlebells will do it. I have a guy I know personally. He's a kettlebell instructor, Jeff Newport, and he's a big, that's what he does, but he loves to alternate. Like one day he'll do a ballistic, like a really light weights heavy and then the next day or 2 days later he'll do heavy, slow and heavy press, like alternate. And I've done that and it works. It works really well. So I think it's good to try different things and see what you like.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about, well, actually, before we move on to our myths and our peptides, let's talk a little bit about muscle and metabolism, because I think this is the final nail in the coffin of why we need to prioritize muscle. Like, this is the final if we haven't convinced you yet that you need functional muscle, that you need all this stuff, muscle for metabolic health balance, being blood pressure, blood sugar, all those things, all those metabolic functions that get out of whack, that lead to this crazy thing called metabolic syndrome, which then takes us to this crazy place where we become more susceptible to neurodegenerative diseases. And it's just like the finish line doesn't look pretty. So let's talk a little bit about muscle and metabolism, the M&M.
Absolutely. I love that. Yeah, no, that's a great point. So everybody wants to, like we were talking about earlier with, sarcopenic obesity, we want to flip the switch and kind of do what we call partitioning. We want to build the muscle and burn the fat. You can do it at the same time. It's a little more difficult than focusing on one, but it can be done. So by building that muscle up, most people know about, what you mentioned earlier with glycogen and glucose. By improving your muscle or doing a strength training workout, you're going to improve your insulin sensitivity. And the more you do it, the better it's going to get. And of course, everybody knows about insulin sensitivity nowadays with how bad insulin resistance is. So many people are insulin resistant and on that path to prediabetes. I mean, what is it, like almost half the population here in North America is like, it's ridiculous. So improving insulin sensitivity is massively important and a huge win to prevent you from going down that road. Insulin resistance leads to, metabolic syndrome and diabetes and high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, all these things that we can prevent just by improving insulin sensitivity. So that's number one. Number two, as you mentioned with the glycogen, you're going to deplete and refill your glycogen stores when you're done working out, especially a strength training movement. When you eat, your body's going to partition that fuel. It's preferentially going to fill that glycogen back up to your muscle. So that's the time you slam the carbs, you do tons of protein, you really eat because it's going to go to your muscles. It's not really going to go to your fat. I mean, yeah, if you're eating 50 pounds of McDonald's, probably it's going to be a problem, but who's doing that? I mean, I'm not. So if you do it smart, you're going to fuel your muscle and not so much the fat. And then the rest of the day, you could eat the way you want to kind of burn that fat by eating more of a whatever dietary regimen you're on to kind of burn that fat strategy. So you're going to get a muscle partitioning effect. And by fueling your body with the carbohydrates and lots of protein, you're going to increase that. And then you're also going to increase, the thermic effect of food because it takes more energy to burn up and convert that protein into fuel. Same with carbohydrates, and fat's kind of the least thermogenic. And it's, some studies will say it's a big effect. Some say it's not. But like we were talking about earlier, every little bit counts, right? So it all adds up. And then of course, the muscle, of course, is more metabolically active. It takes a lot of energy 24/7 to maintain that muscle. Our bodies are very smart. We want to conserve as much fuel as possible. So if you want to maintain that, you got to keep feeding it. But by having that extra muscle, you're burning up more calories. Your body's building that muscle up and you're burning through all those calories, all that energy on a consistent basis. So as a metabolic effect, that's 24/7. You go do a cardio burst, you're done burning calories as soon as you stop. But when you build muscle, that muscle's consuming and burning and turning and building 24/7. So that is, where's your body going to get that calorie? It's going to burn up your fat as long as you're eating properly. So you can get a 2-for-1 effect. So that's how it does. And then we get into the whole myokine effect that we talked about earlier too. The myokines that your muscle secretes, it works on the muscle, works on the bones, but it also works on the fat. And it's actually going to help break down that fat, what we call lipolysis, to pull those fatty acids out to burn up for fuel and use it for other things too. So the myokines are a whole other pathway. So, and then there's the whole structural component, the energy, just by being active, by being moving, you're turning on all this other machinery in your body, you're activating your brain, you're getting other feel-good hormones cooking, the BDNF in your brain, the endorphins, all these different things that make you want to go do stuff. When you're, like you said earlier, when you're active, you're doing things, you feel better. And guess what do you do when you feel better? You do more better things, right? You go connect, you go for a walk, you eat right. But when you're sitting around all grumpy and sad and you're tired, well, you're going to go eat your Ben & Jerry's ice cream, or you're going to go watch TV. So it's a mental, emotional effect too. A lot of people forget about that. So
yeah, I think it goes back to, I remember once, can't remember who it was. It was at a conference and this guy, he was standing there saying, oh, you know who it was? I think it was Brendan Burchard at the time. And he was talking about, all these people running around saying, I don't have energy. I have no energy. I'm so tired, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, I think it was him. And maybe it wasn't. But whoever it was said, it was so interesting. It was so well articulated. He goes, you need to understand that your body is an energy factory. Like you are making energy every second of every minute of every hour of every day. And people don't, they think they have to bring energy in from the outside, but ultimately, and what you're talking about here, muscle is one of your most powerful energy factories because it's full of mitochondria and the whole 9 yards. And so what we're talking about here is kind of reclaiming your energy by being active, not by sleeping, and not that, and I'm not dissing recovery and sleep and all those things, but we forget that to break that cycle of inactivity, it takes just kind of overcoming the inertia of inactivity and just starting to take a step in the right direction.
Right.
So, all right. So we're going to come back to muscle and metabolism and stuff later in our peptide conversation. But now what I'd really like to get into is our two, just the hormone piece of our conversation. And what we agreed we were going to talk about is we were going to talk about testosterone for women and estrogen for men, which people might be sitting there going, no, Nat, you mean estrogen for women and testosterone for men. And I'm like, no, I mean testosterone and how important it is to women, and then estrogen for men, because I think that and as much as there's probably lots of listeners, because we have lots of people who really know their stuff listening to this podcast, lots of people may be very familiar with this idea, the idea that testosterone is such a crucial hormone for women. And that this piece, like this heavy weightlifting and building muscle, is going to support that testosterone. But that sometimes when we're looking at hormone therapy for hormone replacement or replenishment therapy for women, testosterone is the forgotten hormone. And then and then for men, how, so many men expend so much energy trying to, block estrogen and do whatever, not realizing that they need that estrogen also, and not just to be in touch with their feminine selves. So
well said, Nat. Well said. Yeah. So a lot of my female clients, I still, I'm always busting myths, and that's still prevalent, right? With this testosterone, there's really no male hormone, female hormone. Men and women both need all of them, right? And there's just different proportions and different amounts. So, and what I tell women, and I have a lot of women in perimenopause and in menopause. I see both. And that's when I tell them, I say, look, when you're going through perimenopause, getting into menopause, testosterone is one of the first hormones to drop. I mean, growth hormone starts dropping really early, but from the female perspective, progesterone and testosterone start dipping first. Estrogen is kind of the last domino to fall. That's further down the road, and it comes at different rates for different women. But with the progesterone, they get it when I explain that. But testosterone, like, oh yeah, or either they had no idea, or they forgot, or no idea. And you're right. The myth is that that's not just something for guys. I'm like, no, like you make it too, and you just don't make as much as a guy does, but you still make it. And it's very important. And some of the symptoms that you're telling me about that you're unhappy with are because of your drop in testosterone. So when women are grumpy and they're getting tired, they're getting fatter, they're losing their sex drive, they're losing their mental motivational drive. That's why, and their mood is down. That's why. That's one of the reasons that it's down anyway. So it's extremely important for women, and not just from a feel good perspective to make them feel better, look better, and enjoy sex. That's very important, of course, but also has many other effects, like we were talking about earlier with bone, and muscle. Women are always worried about bone as they get older. And I tell them that the testosterone is a very anabolic hormone. It's one of the things that's going to help maintain your bone mass so you don't get that osteoporosis, that fracture when you fall. It's going to prevent you from falling. Testosterone has a lot of anti-inflammatory effects. Most people are kind of starting to learn about the inflammation, how bad it is for our health. And one of the powerful factors with testosterone, with men and women, it's a very anti-inflammatory hormone. Helps boost out, hormones like IL-15, and it can lower some of the inflammatory cytokines in the body and improve your health from that perspective. We were talking earlier about glycemic control in terms of improving insulin sensitivity, improving metabolism, mitochondrial health. Guess what? Testosterone does that too. It improves your mitochondrial health. It helps you burn up more energy more efficiently. It improves your insulin sensitivity. It can reduce your incidence of metabolic syndrome and diabetes. It improves your lipids, your cholesterol numbers. It improves your blood sugar, improves your insulin, can improve your blood pressure, improve your muscle mass, which is going to do all the beautiful things we talked about earlier. It's very anti-inflammatory, and similar to estradiol, has effects in the brain in terms of improving mood. And like we were saying, if you feel good about things, you're going to go do more stuff. So it's extremely important for women, and they forget about that. And then when I explain it, they're like, I get it. It can also be very beneficial for reducing incidence of cancer, just like progesterone. And a lot of women don't know that, but it's very protective in that regard, similar to estrogen and progesterone, very protective against cancer. There's actually, I'm here in Ohio in the U.S., and there's a surgeon probably about 3 hours from me, Dr. Becky Glazer, and she's actually been treating active cancer with testosterone injections right into the breast.
Really?
So very successfully too, by the way. And she's an surgical oncologist. Yeah. So it's actually being back in the day, we used to give testosterone estrogen for cancer and it worked, but it's kind of been forgotten about since the big pharma takeover. So, sorry, I'm not suicidal. So, and, so it has a lot of beneficial effects. And when women, of course, they worry, well, I guess we'll talk about myths later, but women worry about the side effects of it. And I always try to allay their concerns.
Talk about it now.
Yeah. So number one, women, like you said, they're like, oh, am I going to get big and muscular? No. I mean, you'd have to do, because number one, with women, when we replenish their testosterone, we're giving much lower doses than we do to men. So that's just not going to happen. They're just not going to put on a ton of muscle. They're going to maybe gain some, but nothing, nowhere near like the guys. So you would have to take massive amounts of it and live in the gym and plus probably other anabolics to really get big and bulky. It's just not going to happen. They worry about, we talked about cancer. I to explain it's going to reduce their cancer risk. So that's not going to happen. Any side effects are pretty well mitigated because, again, we usually do lower doses. Some women are more sensitive to it. Some women, especially if they will do higher doses, they worry about other things. Like you'll hear stories of women getting hair thinning or hair loss, or their voice is going to change or something like that, or they're going to grow a penis or something. And like, that's just not going to happen, right? I mean, yeah, if you're taking massive doses, you could happen. And some women are just more sensitive to, that's a whole nother conversation, whether they have PCOS or some other issues that they have some hair thinning or some voice change. It can happen, but not that common. In fact, I don't have any of my patients that have had that happen to. And even if there is just a dose reduction, and it'll just kind of go away. So the side effects are few and far between, and the risk benefit is very skewed in favor of the benefit. So
right.
I try to.
And is it always an excess of testosterone, or can it be an imbalance of testosterone with the other hormones? Because very often, people will talk about having too much of a hormone, but sometimes it's not so much that you have too much of something as the delta between that hormone and its balancing hormone is too big. And, it's a little bit like the omega-6, omega-3 problem, right? We need to lower omega-6 and increase omega-3. You can't
Can't do
one or the other to bring them back into balance, kind of thing. So
I think, and that's a big mistake I see with a lot of these mills, these clinics that just crank patients out, put them on cookbooks, or these social media people that all of a sudden they're hormone experts, but they have no medical training or whatever. And they just give one thing and just do the same thing for everybody. And then they get messed up. And I know, because I see them, my colleagues see them, we have to fix it. It's like a symphony or like a little stack of dominoes. Like they're all interconnected. You flick one domino down, it's going to knock down three others. So when you adjust one, you have to look at how it's affecting everything, and not just testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. You got to look at thyroid, insulin, ghrelin, GLP, the CCK hormones in the gut, serotonin, dopamine in the brain, glucagon, all these other hormones that people don't kind of forget about. So yeah, you're right. It can definitely be an imbalance. So you have to look at all those and see how they're connected. If someone's highly stressed, underslept, and their adrenal glands are a mess, well, we have to address that too. Yeah. And I see that a lot with thyroid. If their adrenal glands are a mess, they're very connected. You have to play with them at the same time. You can't just give one or the other. So that's very, very important. And then the other issue is like a hypersensitivity. I mentioned PCOS earlier, which is actually a disorder of insulin and usually insulin resistance. So their skin, their hair follicles are hypersensitive to insulin, to testosterone. So they think that testosterone is bad. Well, testosterone is just kind of an innocent bystander. It's actually the insulin resistance that's the problem. And you have to fix that. And once you fix that, you can give these girls testosterone all day long and they feel great. But you have to block the effects of it on the skin and the hair follicles. And you can do that with diet, with medications, addressing the insulin resistance. So yeah, absolutely. They're all connected. They're all important. You have to look at every single one of them.
Okay. That little balancing act. Okay. Well, let's talk about the boys and estrogen. Because guys, you can learn about testosterone in a million different places. And, we know all the things, but very few people talk about men and estrogen. So I just thought maybe we would have that conversation here today.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think more and more people are waking up to it and realizing it, but there's still that myth. There's still the bro talk on the forums and different places that, bro, you got to block your estrogen. I'm like, no, you don't. I'm like, and I tell guys, just to be blunt, I say, look, if you want thin bones, a fat gut, and a limp dick, then block your estrogen all day long, because that's what's going to happen. Because they've done studies on this, long-term studies, several years or more of guys, blocking estrogen for years, and that's what happens. It's sad when you look at, different bodybuilders, different people that are dying at a young age, and obviously there's other factors that play too. It's one of them. Sure. Well, I had a very good friend of mine, Dr. John Chrysler. I don't know if you ever met him. He was a very well-known hormone specialist. He was up in Michigan, a very, very cool guy. And for years, he just railed on that, like testosterone, you got to block the estrogen. Well, he finally changed his tune, and it was after he had a heart attack, and then he recovered. And then he's good friends with one of my mentors, Dr. Neil Rouzier, and they were always battling. Yes, Dr. Neil was, don't block it. And John was, you got to block it. For years, it was just kind of a friendly thing. And then after a while, John was like, you know what? You're right. You shouldn't block it. I was the dumbass kind of thing. So
wow.
It took a while, but it
and a heart attack.
Yeah. So the bottom line is you don't want to block it. It is bro science because a lot of the benefits from testosterone actually come from its downstream conversion into estradiol and DHT. And the ones that people don't realize is fat loss, sexual function, and sex drive. That's more from the estradiol effect than the testosterone. More than anything, the DHT is very anabolic, even more so than testosterone. So you don't want to block these with finasteride and anastrozole and all these different things. You don't want to block either one of them. Now there are times to control it, but usually it can be more of a dose adjustment. That's all you have to do. I think I've used a blocker once, and it was literally for like a week or 2 weeks or something, and that's it. Usually it either doesn't happen or you lower the dose and they're fine. But the bottom line is that a lot of the benefits from this testosterone from clinical studies, randomized trials, as well as a lot of experience, they come from the estradiol. So the benefits of estradiol on bone health, cardiovascular disease, your lipids, your cholesterol metabolism, that all comes from that. So if you block that, you're going to lose that effect. And of course, we know what the number one killer of men and women is: heart disease. So you got to keep the inflammation down, keep the visceral fat down, keep your lipids in the right place, and so on and so forth. Several of my colleagues, I should say, are actually have men on testosterone, and they're still having really problems with like out of control lipids, and they're actually putting them on oral estradiol as well, and their metabolic parameters are like, whew, now they're normal. They're like, boom, amazing changes, and they're fantastic. Well, I'm like, wow, that's pretty cutting edge stuff. I'm not doing that, but the bottom line is testosterone with men and women both need it. With men, you do not want to block estradiol. And a lot of guys are like, well, what if my estrogen gets high? That's okay. When you're an 18-year-old, your levels are probably close to 80. That's normal, so don't worry about it. Yes, if you want to, should it be over 1,000 or 500? Well, probably not, because I think as with everything, you can have too little, you can have too much. I like optimal in the higher end, but some guys need to be higher, some guys need a little bit lower, but it really comes down to your symptoms. But you don't have to block it, because if you do, as I mentioned, you're going to lose cardiovascular risk protection, which is your number one killer. It's going to cause osteoporosis. You're going to start accumulating visceral fat, which we all know is very dangerous and very predisposing you to all these health conditions we've been talking about. And it's going to affect your sexual performance. And as soon as you mention that, most guys are like, oh, okay, I don't want to lose that.
Yeah. So you mentioned something earlier, though, I just want to circle back on quickly before we move to our next topic. And that is, you mentioned finasteride and DHT. So one of the issues of excessive DHT, obviously, for men and women, really, is hair loss. And male pattern baldness obviously has a very strong connection to an excess of DHT or hypersensitivity of receptors to DHT. And so finasteride is one of those medications that people will use to block, but there's different ways of taking it, right? Orally or topically. And is the topical application maybe a little less risky because it's not going through the system in the same way? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, if I would use it, I would definitely use the topical. The oral is prone to issues. And you look at a lot of the studies, you're like, look, the testosterone does not cause it. It's more of a genetic pattern. It's just going to happen. Although with some guys, they swear up and down like it didn't start till after starting. So like you said, it's more of a hypersensitivity issue. So I think if you're going to use it, I think the topical forms, a lot of the pharmacies have some pretty cool products where they use a pretty low dose finasteride combined with 3 or 4 other products, including there's peptides, there's like natural products, different things that work really, really well. If you're going to use it, the oral can work, but I wouldn't take it if you're not on testosterone, because there's always at risk of that post-finasteride syndrome, which can be irreversible. So you don't want to mess with that too much. I'm like, do you want to be healthy and strong, or do you want to have thick hair? What do you what do you want?
It's a tough one, right? It's a tough one. It's a tough one. I think that it's a difficult, it's a conundrum, I think, and especially in the men where it's a genetic issue and it hits them very young, very early on. Yeah. And that's a whole other podcast. Okay. Right. So let's move into, and we're going to talk back to muscle again. Let's talk a little bit about a couple of peptides, because you are a peptide guy. And we kind of went around we kind of went around the bush here a little bit saying, well, what are we going to talk about? Peptides aren't really, the FDA's come down last fall and really changed the peptide landscape. And there's a lot of uncertainty in the space around the peptides that people are used to using. But the good news is, we have BPC 157 available orally, and it's being combined in very innovative formulas right now by some really great supplement manufacturers. But we were going to talk about the GLP-1s because we've talked a lot about, building muscle. And at the end of the day, people who've been inactive for a long time and who have some metabolic imbalances very often have too much fat mass, not enough muscle mass. They've gotten themselves upside down on the equation. It's very hard for them to kind of overcome, especially people who've kind of gained and lost weight a bunch of times in their life. And now their metabolism's kind of broken. The insulin resistance sets in. It's just really hard to break out of that cycle. So the good news is, over the last couple of years, what's bubbled up into the mainstream, and these things have been around for much longer than that, are the GLP-1 agonists. And we're going to talk, meaning semaglutide, which is Ozempic, and tirzepatide, which is Mounjaro. And then there's a couple of other GLP-1 agonists, older ones like the liraglutide and all the glutides. But the thing we're going to hone in on a little bit because of the beginning of our conversation is this whole topic of muscle, because you've got so many people who are so insistent that if you use these things, you will lose your muscle. You'll turn into a bag of skin and bones and, you're no further ahead than you were before. And that is a myth that I think we have to continue to lean into, that, and maybe touch a little bit on, the media did a real kind of kill article on these products recently, coming out with, people are getting paralyzed, their stomach is paralyzed for life. They're being damaged for life from these things. And I have my own perspective on that article. I don't know if you want to share yours, but let's start on the muscle piece, and then let's maybe talk a little bit about what could be some of the shortcomings.
Absolutely. And very well said in that. So I agree 100%. I think that risk is obviously it's there, but it's definitely been overblown and kind of media sized, if that's a word. So any weight loss you do, even if you just do a caloric deficit, if you fast, whatever, most people are going to lose, you're going to lose fat, but you are going to lose some muscle, period. Ideally, want to shoot for, more fat than muscle. Bill Campbell will talk about like ideally maybe 75% fat, 25% muscle, somewhere in that range is great, but it's going to happen at least a little bit. Now, can you mitigate that even further? I think so. Yes. If you're really upping your protein intake, really focusing on strength training, focusing on your recovery work, optimizing your hormones, all these different things. So with the GLP-1, it is another weight loss tool, similar to a caloric deficit. Yes, you're going to burn fat off because you're metabolizing it, you're slowing down your gastric emptying, all the different ways that the GLP-1s work. You're going to lose fat. But the trick is, and again, it can be a big motivator to get someone going, especially I use a lot for my patients that are just frustrated because they've tried this, they just can't move the needle. And then once they start seeing results, now they're excited. I have one young lady, I won't say her name here, start with an S, but she's, has done all these things for years, tried all these different diets and nothing. Finally, we did this and we got her, and you look at her before and after, and she's a different woman. She feels great. Now she's lifting weights more. She's more active. She's happy. Now she's doing the things that she couldn't do before because she just was frustrated. She's like, I tried working out and now she wants to do it. Now she's doing it. So it can turn the needle. So the key is, managing that lifestyle. You don't want to just use it as a crutch. Kind of like I laugh when I see those commercials. They're like, oh, I get heartburn, so I just pop my Protonics. I'm just going to keep eating my weight. Like, no, you got to change what you're doing a little bit, So if you change the lifestyle, you work with them over time, get those habits in place. Now they can get to the point where maybe they don't need the GLP-1 or they can taper off it, or maybe they just use it as needed. I don't think, and I don't know if the data, and again, we don't have enough long-term data, but I like to rotate my strategies, my peptides, my diet anyway. So, and I see more clinicians starting to get in. I don't think you should be on it for years and years and years. I think you should do it maybe 6 to 12 months and stop, or maybe just do it for a few months, take a break for a week or two, do it for another couple months, take a break. There's different ways to do it. But I like to mix things up a little bit. That's just me. I think the body responds to that better. I think we're built for that. Kind of like, the old hunter-gatherer days. Some days you ate a lot and you didn't do much. Other days you were really active hunting down the prey and you feasted. So I think we thrive on that. So, but that's just me. Everybody's, can do their own thing. But I think that's the long-term play, I don't think, at least yet, I want someone being on this for years and years. I think most people probably want to get off it at some point. So anyway, I'm telling a long story, but the bottom line is, can you lose muscle mass? You can, but I think if you put those dietary lifestyle strategies in place, you're going to mitigate that loss tremendously. And then when you get to that point where you're slowing down or you stop it, obviously you can build that muscle back up. You're going to be in a better place because your fat mass is way down. Maybe you've lost a little muscle, but you can build that back up. The other thing too is then you can start at, even in the early phase of the GLP-1, you can use some other strategies, whether it's other peptides, other hormones, other supplements, to stimulate that muscle growth some more. Like I will use like the growth hormone peptides or the BPCs to help maintain that muscle mass, because that's what it does, right? Growth hormone is going to help you maintain muscle mass while you're burning fat. So you can kind of balance that out a little bit. You could do it right out of the gate, or after maybe a month or two, you could kind of do that too. Sometimes when we're talking about the dominoes, you kind of got to play around for a little bit. So I think if you're increasing your strength training, increasing your protein intake, and maybe adding some hormonal support or other peptides, you can really minimize that muscle loss, and while you're burning off that fat, and then all the while building in your lifestyle strategies. And then once you learn that, you can let it go, and you're going to be good. So that's my take on it. I think that whole, like, I'm going to shrink away and be this skinny thing, I think that's overblown. Yeah, if you don't change anything, don't do anything else. Yeah, of course. But who's going to do that? I'm not going to let my patients do that. So,
well, and that's the thing. I think it's the guidance that people are getting is really critical. I also think that the thing that gets forgotten, because there's going to be other things that are going to come out on the market to challenge the GLP-1s. But I think one of the things that people forget about the GLP-1s is how many different ways they support this change in body composition, by increasing your resting metabolic rate, by decreasing your cravings because it acts on the brain, by decreasing your hunger because it slows down the gastric emptying, which ironically is part of where some trouble can happen for some people. Right. But also by improving insulin sensitivity and by specifically improving the uptake of glucose by skeletal muscle, which ultimately should and can make it easier to use your muscles, to build your muscles, and to, again, it's about reversing a negative spiral that people are getting into of that insulin resistance, of muscles that are starving and shrinking and the whole 9 yards. So maybe, maybe touching a tiny bit on this, I think the sensationalized articles that have come out in the media about people who've been wrecked and I don't fully get the motivation behind it, because from what I can see, they're very sensationalized cases, like very few cases where people have gotten into trouble. There's very little information about what these people were doing, how they were doing it. Did they have any pre-existing conditions? There was actually, the good news is there was just an article that was published in Medscape. I don't know if you saw it, that after, I don't know how many years study, they were able to show that that the GLP-1s do not increase the risk of pancreatic cancer in diabetic people,
Yeah, I think I did see that. Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. And I think, there's kind of like the stories on hormones and other things, like, well, this happened. Well, what's the whole story? As you mentioned, what else were they doing? What else were they eating? What else, there's so many other factors. And, we're talking about the different effects, and the GLP-1s, like you said, has a lot of other effects on the metabolism. And it also has a lot of beneficial effects on the heart and the brain. So it's touted as almost like an anti-aging drug. If you had to pick one thing, slowing down the aging process in the brain, again, by improving that insulin sensitivity, neuroplasticity, protection of the heart. I mean, so many people have early heart disease or risk factors. So by improving your cardiac health, going to improve many, many things as well. And like you mentioned too, I did see a study too that indicated that it can improve, the muscle health. So it might actually help you build muscle. You're not going to. So again, if you're doing all these strategies, I think it can catapult you to build that muscle up. So
which,
very interesting.
In the end will help you to get off it too, right? Because if you maintain your lean mass, and that should be helpful in terms of stepping back from it. So, okay, last thing before we go, we were talking a little bit about some of the newer supplements out on the market that seem to be moving the needle for people who maybe don't want to be on a GLP-1 agonist, or maybe want to take a break. And you were talking about taking breaks, which is really interesting. But, you do see this fear in people, especially people who've lost quite a lot of weight on the GLP-1 agonist. They get really nervous about stepping away from it. They're like, no, I'm really digging my new body. I'm really digging this size that I'm wearing. I like looking good in a swimsuit again. And there's a couple of supplements out there now that are actually seem to be really helpful in whether it's the initial weight loss and not using GLP-1s at all, or even as a bridge in those breaks, or maybe taking over when people come off. And one of them we talked about, which I think there's two companies that are making really interesting stacks in this space. And one of the companies is called Healthgevity, and they make a product called Ignite Plus. And the other one, which you didn't even know about, is Level Up Health, that makes their body recomp. And, and the body recomp is like a more complex formula, but the Healthgevity Ignite Plus, and both of us, I think, have seen clinical examples of people that have done really well on the supplements. But I think the way I refer to them is the GLP-1s, your training wheels on the bike are very close to the ground. If you've ever taught a little kid how to ride a two-wheeler, and then these supplements, the training wheels are like, they're off the ground. So you really got to work a lot harder.
Right. Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
That's a good analogy. I love that. I love that analogy too. That's good. Yeah, for sure. And I 100% agree. I mean, prior to these, I mean, there's as you know, of course, there's been tons of the weight loss supplements, and the Adipexes and Contrave, and use things like, Joel and I have talked about, use like berberine and ALA, and all these different metformin, all these different things, and they can be helpful. But I think some of these newer ones are pretty interesting because especially they work in the gut and they do some different things similar to GLP-1. So the Ignite Plus you mentioned is pretty interesting, and I spoke with him and got hooked up with them and have been using their supplements. I had a few clients using it as well. And I had as you mentioned, I had a gal who was on the GLP for a bit, and then she just decided she didn't want to do it anymore. She was doing okay with it. I think it was more of a financial thing, and maybe somebody wanted to, some of her gut was, she just sometimes felt okay, sometimes she didn't. So she wanted to try something different. So I put her on that, and after like 4 to 6 weeks, she's like, you know what, I really like this. I've gone down like a size. I feel like I've gotten a little thinner down here. It's not huge, but it's something. And I noticed a difference, and I thought that's fantastic. So I've got a few other people I'm going to play around with it too. So I think that's a pretty cool product because it's, no stimulants. It works in the gut. It does some other metabolic pathways. So I think, from a safety perspective, obviously my first thing is I want to make sure it's safe and not going to cause any problems, but I don't see that. I mean, obviously you'll have to try it a lot more times, but pretty cool product. And the other one I will have to look into as well for sure.
Yeah. Well, both of them hinge on DNF10, which is a peptide. And that one thing that people need to remember, and I've talked about it before on a couple of podcasts, is know that it does take about a month to kick in. Like you have to be consistent, and it's not the overnight success. So you need to be, you kind of got to stick with it. And they also tap into some of the other compounds that you mentioned earlier, like, and both of them, I think, use the dihydroberberine, which is a more potent form of berberine. Right. There's the bitter melons in there. So all these different agents to help with blood sugar control. And the DNF10, of course, is the satiety piece. So, okay, well, I think we've covered lots of ground, Dr. Fete. I think we could keep talking, but maybe
we could talk for hours. This has been fun. This has been fun.
This has been super fun. And then there's Joel's work, right? In affecting the microbiome. So we'll have to do that another day. But anyway, hopefully by now people are as fascinated with your body of work as I am. And why don't we tell people where they can find you and reach out to you and follow your work?
Yes, thank you so much. You've been a gracious host, and hopefully I provide some value for your listeners. I love talking about this stuff as you know, just like you do. So so Dr. Eric PrimeX is my website. That's the best place to find me. My weight loss site is PrimeX Weight Loss. So most people go there, but I'm all over social media. So Dr. Eric Fete on Instagram and on Facebook, I just under my personal name, and then I have a business page under PrimeX Cellular Nutrition and Fitness. I have 2 pages there. And I have and same thing on my PrimeX channel. I have a ton of videos on YouTube. A lot of people I send there just to watch because I just talk about everything we've been talking about and then some. So social media or my website is the best place to go. So thank you again so much. I'd love to come on again and talk more. This is fun.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nat.